Okay, so after this amazing session of MPA, the next session we have is another data set. So Dr. Saral Desai is going to speak. So I hand it over to my moderators to introduce the fantastic Dr. Saral Desai.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another session. So we introduce you Dr. Saral Desai. He's a certified clinical research professional and a first-year psychiatry resident at Tower Health Drexel University College of Medicine in the Greater Philadelphia area. He's passionate about research in psychiatry and is actively involved in research on topics related to adolescent health, substance use, and health risk behaviors. He currently serves as a guest editor for the journal Children by MDPI and has 28 peer-reviewed publications. He has presented at nationally recognized conferences such as ACAP, AAAP, API, and AMA multiple times. As a resident, he plans to continue scholarly activities and inspire more medical students and residents to join him in his research endeavors. So we welcome you, Dr. Desai, to talk to shed light on the topic on how to use YRBSS dataset for research. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. So I'm here to talk about this topic, where I'll go through the details of YRBSS database, what it is, what are the topics that you can explore using this data, and what are the things that you need to be careful about when using this database. So let me share my screen. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, Dr. Desai.
Okay, let me start this. All right, so yeah, this is today's topic, how to do research using YRBSS dataset. I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose for this presentation. So this is the overview of detail of YRBSS data. So YRBSS stands for Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, and it is conducted by CDC. It aims to monitor 6 main categories of health-related behaviors, which contribute to leading causes of death and disability among youth and adults. So these categories include behaviors that contribute to unintentional injuries and violence, sexual behavior related to unintended pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV infection, alcohol and other substance use, tobacco use, which includes cigarettes and e-cigarettes, unhealthy dietary behaviors like how much fruits do you drink, how much soda you drink, and stuff like that. Inadequate physical activity, they have questions where they explore like how much physically active you are, whether you participate in physical activity at school, at home, and stuff like that. And in addition to that, YRBSS also monitors prevalence of obesity in form of question as well as BMI. And it also monitors prevalence of asthma and other health-related behaviors. I think since 2015, they added questions related to sexual identity and sex of sexual context as additional topic of exploration. So the purpose, again, it's to determine the prevalence of the health risk behaviors that I explained earlier, to analyze the trends over years to see if this behaviors increase, whether they increase, decrease, or stay same. They also examine if there is any co-occurrence of health behaviors, like you may be using cigarettes, do you use other substances? And then the other important goal is to provide a national, state, territorial, and basically national estimates but they also collect state-based data. I'll talk about it in later session. And yeah, so ultimately the goal is to monitor these behaviors and find out whether they're increasing, decreasing, what we can do about these behaviors. So it's kind of more public health approach for this data. So the main thing about this data is that it is a nationally representative sample of school-based children in grades 9th through 12th. And it is survey-based. So surveys are given to schools where children complete the surveys. So that is an important thing to know about this data. They conduct a new survey every 2 years. And like I mentioned, it's 9th through 12th grade. So if you repeated grades, then you would still, I mean, you can be 19 years old and still be in 12th grade. So then you would make up, I mean, you will be part of this data. And this is just a little bit information about what are all the states and regions that they use to collect this data. Okay, so now, after giving this overview, I'm gonna open the site where they have mentioned. So this is the site, CDC. It's a database of CDC. So the other important thing to know about this data is that they publish this reports, fact sheets about this data. Many of the things like uh, prevalence or trends of cigarette use, they would have already published it in this data. So it's a good idea to kind of go through this different reports and see what they have already published. Because if you try to publish a paper on trends of cigarette use, that's not going to be useful because they have already done that. So that is something to keep in mind. So I would recommend you go through each of these reports that they have already published. They also have a section where they have given a list of publications that were already done using this data. So you can see all these journal articles. For some reason, they haven't updated it after 2019. Maybe once they release 2021 data, they may update this list. I'm not sure when they'll release it because there were disruptions because of COVID. So you can go through this list for each year where major studies were published in journals using YRBSS data. So you kind of get more idea about what kind of studies people have done. And if you are thinking about a research question, then you have to make sure that it is unexplored and it's something new, because if you publish the same study using same year's data, then that's going to be a problem and it's less likely to be published. And it kind of reflects poor on your side that you didn't do literature search to know that the study is already published. So that is other thing to keep in mind while working with this data. So let's first go through this data and documentation tab, where you will be able to find the public use files. So this is the data and documentation part where you'll find all the public use files that you can download and then upload it in your statistical software. YRBSS is pretty good that that database is already cleaned. They've already done all the logical edits, and they've already given you different formats, the most common ones like SAS and SPSS. So it's pretty simple to download this data and then upload it in your statistical software. They also have given code books that you can go through. For example, I opened this 2019 data code book. where they would provide you the same introduction that I mentioned, what kind of edits they have done, because it's a survey-based study. So, for example, being is that if you ask someone whether you smoke cigarette or not, that's one question, and then you ask how many times do you smoke cigarettes. So only if you answer yes to first question, you go to second. So if you don't account for that, then you may end up getting kind of erroneous data answers. So they kind of make sure that they have cleaned all those things. So you don't need to worry about those. So these are the variables that are part of this data. They have given detailed instruction about how they have calculated race, how they have calculated BMI, how they have derived the sexual minority. And this data defines their own, for sexual minority, there can be multiple definitions depending on where you're looking, like gender, sex, what is sexual minority, who are all part of it, LGBTQ, or there are more categories. So for simplicity, they have given this to you that for this data, this is the definition, and like they derived from XYZ resources. So it's important to keep that in mind as well while you're doing research, because during peer review, they may ask you like, how did you get this definition? And so that you can tell them in your defense that this is the official definition used by this data. So we basically decided to follow that. So these are all the questions. These are variables actually. So questions will hold on. And they were also given this pretty useful table where you can see for each data set from 1997 to 2019, which variables overlap and which do not, which becomes important when you want to do trend analysis or when you want to do analysis on combined data, because you have to account for that. If for example, sexual minority data, it's only from 2015. So if you are doing study from 1997, then you don't have any data in that variable until 2015. So if you publish a paper where you say you use the data from 1997 to 2019, that's kind of inaccurate because they didn't have the main variable that you're trying to study. They only included it after 2015. So this is a good table to kind of go over to get idea about that. The file that I opened, it doesn't have it because this is only for 2019. So for this, they have just given like which states were involved in like study for each year. But if you go to the combined data set code book, they have given this like which variables were included in each year's data. So you can go through that. So it's always good to go to codebook to get idea about what questions were they asked, and they have also explained the secondary variables that they derived from primary questions. Like for many times they have dichotomized a lot of these questions to yes and no questions. So they have explained how they have done that using this, like for example, Q20, that's a primary question, and then QN20, which is a dichotomized version of that question, and they've explained how they have derived that. So yeah, you have to go through this code book, and even when once you have loaded your data in SAS or SPSS, code book is always good to have it in front of you so you can tally up things. And that brings me to another important thing, that with any data that you plan to use, which is publicly available, they have descriptive statistics at the bottom where they have mentioned frequencies for each, where is it? For each variable. And when you load your data into SPSS, you have to run descriptive statistics in your software, and you have to make sure that both of those frequencies match. The reason it's important to do is because that's the only way you know that you loaded the data correctly. For example, there were 10,000 participants that were asked a particular question, and then you made some error in loading data in your statistics software, and your software is telling you that the number is 800, I mean 8,000, then that kind of gives you a hint that you did something wrong. And that gives you a pretty good idea that even before you start the analysis, you need to check what went wrong, because otherwise your entire study, entire results, everything will be false. And because it's publicly available data, if you publish a paper, you have to mention methods, questions you ask, and everything. And I can run the same analysis following the same methods that you use. And if I get a different results, I can always write to the journal that, well, these results are false. I don't know if that happens that often or not, but it can happen because it's publicly available data. So that's something that one should keep in mind while working with all this publicly available data sets, including national inpatient sample, YRBSS, or any other data that you plan to use. So I'm gonna go through one of the publication that I did using this data to kind of walk you through the process. So this is a kind of brief report that I published, which used 2019 YRBSS data. So I decided to write a brief report because it kind of, I'm more into statistics, not too much into writing. So it kind of makes things easier. It's easier to write a brief report, and then you can focus on kind of results. So that's what I did. So as you can see in the methods, this was a retrospective analysis of CDC's YRBSS 2019 data. Now for this study, I have done more advanced stuff where I have kind of divided tertiary variables from the variables that they had, or my own secondary variables from primary questions. That is something I'll briefly go over later on. But basically, what I did was that the question that asked about cannabis use, and they asked about how many times in your lifetime you have used cannabis. So there were like 4 or 5 categories, like never use, 0 to 9 times, 10 to 20 times, 20 to 50 times, and 50 to 100, and then 100 and more. So for this study, what I did was I combined like middle categories into like moderate users. I think there was another study that did that, and it kind of made logical sense to have less groups, like 10 to 99 times moderate users, more than 100 heavy users. So that's what I did. And then I identified hallucinogen use using survey question. So for YRBSS, they used a combined question. They don't ask like whether you used LSD, whether you used PCP. They combine it like, have you ever used hallucinogens like LSD, acid, PCP, and all this that are mentioned here. So those were the kind of primary variables. And the goal of this study was to identify the link, the association between cannabis use and hallucinogen use. So basically, if you are using cannabis, are you more likely to use hallucinogens? That's what we were trying to assess. And that's why we divided candidates into 3 categories to kind of have a stronger argument point if we see kind of similar type of stepwise increase in hallucinogen use. So as you can see in the results, this is the table describing all the blue bars that describe prevalence of hallucinogen use, and these are the frequency of cannabis use. So as you can see that those who didn't use marijuana, only 0.5% of them use hallucinogen. And as you increase the intensity of cannabis use, the prevalence of hallucinogen use increased significantly. So, which is a significant finding. The other thing is that this is just giving you prevalence. So these results can be confounded by other substance use. You can say that, well, I mean, those who were using marijuana were you also using cocaine, and cocaine was the one that was driving hallucinogen use. So in order to account for that, we did regression analysis where we adjusted for socio-demographic variables, age, sex, race, and then other substances that are part of YRBSS data. And then we found that even after that, the odds of, like, there was a stepwise increase in odds of hallucinogen use based on intensity or frequency of cannabis use, like 4.8 to 10.9 to 37.8. So this was a pretty unique analysis, which was not done before, and that's why it got published. And this is pretty unique finding. There was only one paper uh, that was done in, I think, 1990 that explained that maybe these two are kind of connected. So these are the kind of studies that you're aiming for, because the common studies, they're already done, because this database is pretty simple. They have already cleaned it. Everything is available. You just need a little bit knowledge about statistics and how to kind of keep certain things in mind while analyzing this data, and you can publish your own paper. But that's where the problem is. It's like a lot of papers are already published using this data. So this is kind of to give you an idea about what kind of studies you can do using this data. The other study we did was that was on sexual minority population. We tried to look up prevalence of depression, suicidality, and substance use in sexual minority population. And we found that those who were sexual minority were at higher odds of feeling sad and hopeless, considering suicide, planning suicide, and also they were at higher odds of substance use. So that's the additional study we did using this data. And for this, we also did a trend analysis, and we found that more number of participants identified as a sexual minority from 2015 to 19. So this is to kind of give you an idea about if you're planning to test your own hypothesis, these are the kind of studies you can do. It's very different from an inpatient sample, which is kind of administrative data. This is more survey study design. So it's going to be more, it's going to be different. Like you're not, although you're quantifying things, but it's still kind of survey design. So now going back to, yeah, some of the tips that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about your own project is that it's mostly cross-sectional. All questions are pretty much they're asking them about whether they use it at that moment or not, or like in lifetime use, but they haven't asked. There are only few questions that kind of go back in time. Like there are questions where they ask like, what was the first time? What was the age when you started using cannabis or cigarettes? So those are the only questions which have kind of longitudinal aspect to it. Otherwise, it's pretty cross-sectional. And as you all know, when you're dealing with cross-sectional studies, you can only find association. You cannot find direction, like which came first. You cannot identify that. So that is something to keep in mind. But there's a way to kind of work around it. If you are studying variables that are logically usually happens earlier. For example, there's this another cross-sectional database where they asked about intellectual disability and then depression and anxiety. So it's logical that you're not going to develop intellectual disability uh, because you are depressed or anxious. But the other way of association is more logical. So even though it's cross-sectional data, you can still argue that, well, logically, intellectual disability has to come first. And people will argue with those kind of arguments. But if you say like depression and substance use, it's very hard to prove which came first. Maybe you're depressed, that's why you're using substance, or you were using substance, that's why you got depressed. So that's something to keep in mind when working on this data. It only includes high school students in grade 9 to 12. So it's a significant limitation. You can still do a study focusing more on trends and prevalence of substance use in high school students. For example, the study I did, cannabis and hallucinogen, it is limited to high school students. So if someone has like severe substance use disorder, they are so dysfunctional that they're not even attending schools, then they're not gonna do the survey, and you're not accounting for that population. So that's something important to keep in mind. Like if you're studying for something very serious that would prevent them from going to school, then those participants would be excluded because they won't take part in the survey. So that's something to keep in mind. Uh, it's easier to do national level estimates. The way they have designed this study is that I think every year there are some states who do not participate, and then there are 4 states, I forgot the name, but they don't participate in this YRBSS. So what they do is they use this advanced statistical methods to kind of weight uh, their estimates to kind of give more national representative data. So if you don't apply their like weight and primary sampling unit and cluster data and everything, then you're not getting the accurate estimates. And you cannot do state level estimates using this national data. And it's very complicated to do state level data. State level data is not publicly available, so you have to ask them, and you have to tell them what are you exactly planning to do. So make sure that you keep that in mind. It's a survey study, like I mentioned, to keep in mind. Many studies are already published, so even before you start, if you have a question, it's always good to do literature search and make sure that people haven't already done that. Uh, you have to make sure that you are doing accounting for complex survey methodology. What it means is that they have given this variables of national weight, stratum, and primary sampling unit. You have to account those in your analysis, and depending on your statistical software, they have different ways to account for that. I primarily use SPSS for my studies, and they have this complex add-on for SPSS that allows you to account for those variables. If you don't, then you're getting wrong results. Pre-computed variables, which are already there, pretty simple, but again, people have already used it. So you can still use this data to find something unique, something useful, but that would require that you compute your own variables, and that would require a little bit more knowledge about advanced statistics and coding in like SPSS, SAS, or whichever statistics that you use. So I'm gonna quickly open my SPSS. So this is how it's gonna look like. So this is 2019 data. I already loaded it in the SPSS. So SPSS is pretty user friendly compared to SAS. Stata and SPSS, people have their own preferences. Uh, for this analysis of this data set, SPSS is pretty good enough. So this is that there are 2 views in SPSS. One is kind of data view where you won't be able to make sense of what they're talking about because it's just everything is coded in numbers. So these are responses like to question 1, like what's your race? Then 1 is Caucasian, 2 is African American, 4 is Hispanic Latino. Then that's what you're seeing here. These are the question number that they have asked. So again, if you have code book open with you, you can always go back to your code book, and then like you can directly search like Q1 or QN1, and then it will tell you which question it is, what are the labels like A, B, C, D, and then like how does it uh, correlate with these numbers. In variable view, that's another way to kind of simplify things. The labels are pretty useful to give you kind of quick idea which question it is. So for example, the study that I did, so hallucinogen use question, I think it was Q hallucinogen. So where is it? So basically, you have to find that in this. If you once you find it, to kind of simplify things in SPSS, you can kind of move it on top. Otherwise, I mean, you'll go crazy trying to find each variable, because especially in multivariable regression, you have to kind of include multiple variables. So you can kind of put it here. So now it's here, so you can keep all the variables that you're going to use, and on top you can also delete the ones that you're not going to use. And then, I mean, analysis, I don't know if this is an appropriate session to go deep into it, but I think you need to know what kind of analysis you can do in statistical software. I mean, SPSS, quick way to check the frequency, like I mentioned, that you have to tally that numbers match. You can right click and then go to descriptive statistics, and then it will give you frequency of these numbers. Now, this is not weighted. This frequency is unweighted. So you have to check in that data if they have given the frequency table that's weighted or not weighted. Basically, numbers should match. The good way to do it is that the primary variable that you're trying to study, at least make sure that numbers match in those variable, so that you can figure out that you have loaded the data correctly. And in terms of how you can load the data, let me see. So they've already given the SPSS syntax for each data. So you just download it, and then you open it in your SPSS as syntax, and then you download the data, and you just have to modify the path. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't want to go through it again. So yeah, that's the YRBSS data. It's one of the more simpler ones to work on, but because of those limitations, chances that you're going to find something groundbreaking are pretty less. But still, if you be creative and try to find something unique, you can still find something that is useful. And the other thing is that you need to keep in mind the correct way to do things is to first do literature review and come up with your own question. You should not try to kind of sort out things where you run the analysis and then find something and then go back to making that your hypothesis, because that's not how things work. And if you do that, then it's basically kind of research fraud, because that's not how things are supposed to work. You're supposed to come up with hypothesis based on literature review. You can find out which studies have already been published and stuff like that, and then you come up with a research question, and then you run the analysis, because there's entire theory about it that if you run like this the p-value is only good if you do it once. If you keep doing it for subgroup and keep doing it, eventually you'll find something that is statistically significant, but that is not how that hypothesis testing works. So even if you find something significant, that may not be accurate based on this entire hypothesis about hypothesis testing. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. But again, that's a separate topic you learn when you are learning central limit theorem and all other statistic tests. So Yeah, this is the data. Let me see if I missed something. Yeah, I mean, I think we can go to questions. Yep.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. That was very insightful, and I think we learned a lot, actually.
Yeah.
So let's start with the questions.
Mhm.
So one of the questions that has been asked is, what is like, we have both the data sets, YRBS and NIS. So like how to choose which data set to study first, which is more easier. And if somebody is just starting out, like which ones should they choose and why?
Sure. So survey studies are gonna be, I mean, the data that is based on survey design are gonna be easier than administrative data. The reason being is that I don't know if you attended the previous session. There are a lot of things that you have to do for NIS. You have to find out ICD codes. You have to find out if those codes are validated. For example, if you're trying to study depression, then you have to find valid ICD codes. Either they are defined in previous studies or somewhere to kind of validate that. You cannot just randomly pick any ICD code and run analysis because it may not be validated. Plus, there are a lot of issues about coding errors and stuff like that. And there are a lot of things that you have to do even before you do it, the analysis. And those data sets are so big that if you run NIS data in SPSS, to do single step like getting descriptive statistics of one variable, it's going to take like 4 or 5 minutes to run that because such a huge data set. Compare that to YRBSS, which is like only, I think 10, 14,000 participants are there. If you compare it to NIS, it's like 7 million participants in NIS. So it's going to be easier to do. You don't have to worry about coding. They've already defined the questions. You just have to test your hypothesis. So YRBSS is a pretty good data base to start if you are planning to get into data set analysis because they've cleaned the data. Everything is extensively documented. They have also given guides about how to do analysis. So all you need is, time to go through it and you can basically run the analysis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. That was a very thoughtful answer, and I think answered my question pretty clearly.
Yeah.
So my other question to you is like, what made you interested in research? Like,
Sure. So, I mean, I do consider myself curious person, and even in my childhood, my parents used to say that, well, I mean, he's gonna go into research and stuff. But every time that question comes, like just like all other people, nobody knows what research is, like how to do research, how to get involved in research, and that was the same case with me. And I was also very frustrated by the different studies coming out that are refuting the results. For example, coffee, whether coffee is good or not, every few years there'll be a new study disputing the other. So that kind of prompted me to kind of get involved. Plus, obviously, I mean, I was applying for residency and I didn't have any research experience on my CV. And it's ACGME require. I mean, one of the core competencies that tests your ability to, go through evidence and see the quality of evidence and incorporate in your practice. Plus, there's a QI project requirement. So even to enhance my CV, I kind of decided to get involved in research. Once I figured out what is it about, there are different kind of studies. You don't have to do like randomized control trials to do research. You can write case reports, do analysis of this databases. I got more interested in, statistics and all. So right now, I mean, I'm at a point where like I want more people to get involved and it just makes you a better clinician because now when a new study comes up about caffeine, the recent one, coffee, sorry, like a few months ago, that was meta-analysis of meta-analysis. So it's pretty strong. I didn't have any idea about that like 2 years back. I was like, well, this study is saying something else. This is saying something else. So yeah, that's kind of my journey. It helped me with my application, and I recommend to all applicants, whether for your application or in long term, research is something that everyone should be doing or have knowledge of.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. Another question following up on Garima's question and our talk is, what is the minimum number of publication that you would recommend for an applicant applying into a residency?
So that's a good question. I mean, I don't think programs have a lot of time to screen your application because there's just so many applications out there. So the thing I've heard from a lot of psychiatry program directors is that they look at personal statement, and if it's good, they look at your CV. And CV, they may give it a brief or overview, and that's when it's like if you're like 40 items listed in your publication, everyone would be like, oh my God, how many, like how did this guy get so many publication? And then they may be more inclined to explore, like, oh yeah, what what kind of studies he has done, or depending on their own knowledge. If they are pretty well versed in research, they may know that you did like pretty good quality study, or you just trying to push up your numbers and stuff. But in the end, it's like it's comparison, you versus other applicants. So if you have something that you are you're excelling in, it could be research, something else, then it's always going to draw attention. After pass fail thing, and based on my experience last year talking to friends and all, everyone has at least like 5 7 abstracts, publications and stuff, so that's no longer a new thing. It would look bad if you don't have anything listed in your research section, that they would wonder like, what did this person do, because everyone else is having like 5 7 abstracts or manuscripts. So there's no set number, but if you have more, it's definitely going to catch attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this detailed answer. I think that kind of answers my question very well. Another question, like I have also, I mean, this is like my personal question too. Are there any courses for biostatistics or data analysis that you would recommend for students? Like myself, I want to learn SPSS, but I don't know from where do I learn and which sources are like, should I trust? So,
Sure. Yeah, that's excellent question. Fortunately, there are many websites that have this wonderful courses from this big organization. So I did this writing in sciences certificate course from Stanford, which was pretty good in learning about manuscript structure and everything. For statistics, this was on Coursera. For statistics, there are a couple of courses. There's biostatistics and public health from Johns Hopkins on Coursera. I think Udemy also has dedicated SPSS courses. YouTube also has courses. The biggest challenge with this courses is that you have to first find out what the level they are trying to target, whether it's beginner or advanced, because if you jump directly into advanced course, you're going to give up in like a day or two, because everything is going to go above your head and it's like, what is this guy talking about? So you have to make sure that you go from beginner course that takes less time, easier to complete. Once you have that knowledge, you kind of build upon it and get involved in more advanced courses. And these all are free unless you want a certificate, then you have to kind of pay for that.
got it. Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. I'll definitely look into it and kind of, search around. Dr. Yadav, on to you.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. So my next question, if somebody is not that interested in research, and they somehow want to start out, what would you suggest? Like, what things should they go for first? Like, how do they motivate themselves further to like do research?
I honestly believe that there's no such thing as not liking research. The reason being is that people don't have knowledge about how to do research, and there's just so many roadblocks. Even for writing simple case report, someone may not know what is the structure of manuscript, what are the things you need to have. So that is something that's a big challenge. So if you are someone who wants to do some sort of research, then the easiest thing to do is learn how to write manuscript. What are the structures? Like this course I mentioned, writing in sciences, from Stanford, from Dr. Kristen Sainani. She's pretty excellent. She's not boring at all. So just have a brief overview of what are the structure of manuscript, and then read the case report. You don't even have to get involved in writing. Just read case reports that are already published. Just try to find out, like in your clinical practice, I'm pretty sure you may have some question. You may have seen a patient and you're like, well, I mean, this is not common. What if there is some case report out there that's saying that, oh, well, this has happened? Then read that case report. While you're reading it, you are going through the structure, content, and you're familiarizing yourself. And then once you kind of have this basic knowledge, you can either ask your attending if you see some interesting case, like, hey, I want to write this case report, or try to find people who are already working on it. If you are interested in that topic, it's going to be a little bit easier to write. Otherwise, it's going to feel boring. So that's what I would recommend. Start with case report. Once you publish it, maybe you'll find yourself more interested in research and do, a little bit more like review article and stuff like that, and then go from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desai. That was very insightful.
Yep.
So my next question for you is, when are the updated results going to be released? Like, especially since you told it's pending since 2019. Like,
yeah, I have no idea. They did mention that I think there was a news bulletin that they had to interrupt data collection because of COVID, because all the kids were sitting at home. So, and this is given at school. So I'm not sure if they're going to release it or whether they're going to just skip the 2021. In that case, they may release it on 2023 or something. Yep.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Desai. Also, some public data sets need permissions or some kind of payments before we can access the data sets. Do we need some kind of permissions, or do we need to pay for the access to YRBS?
So all data sets that are by CDC are free to use. The public use data set, they're already de-identified. You don't need IRB approval for that. But I would still recommend, if you are a part of institution, I would still recommend just reaching out to IRB, because they want to make sure you are not violating things, and they may not know how much knowledge you have. Regarding payment, these are all free. If you want to do more focused research that requires more variables, then you can ask them about their restrictive use data sets. That requires more caution on your part, because that may include information that may make candidates identifiable. So that would require IRB approval. It is still free of charge, but that's going to be a little bit more work compared to using this publicly available data. YRBSS, you just go to website, you download it. Even while we're talking, you can download it.
Got it. Thank you so much. So for like starters like us, you would recommend the publicly available, that's already de-identified data.
Yeah, exactly. Because in order to reach that level where you are going to require restricted access data, you need to know the public data first. Right. So yeah, that's what I recommend.
Got it. And there's also a question that are these questionnaires that they ask the youngsters, are they also available in languages other than English?
That's a good question. I think I did read about something like that, but I haven't come across. I mean, I've downloaded all the data for YRBSS. I haven't seen any data that asked question in different language. But I do remember that I think somewhere in the documentation it's mentioned that they did provide interpretation service to those who didn't speak English, because otherwise there'd be kind of disparity. If someone doesn't speak English, then that would be a problem. But then logically, I mean, if they're in high school, they would know English, at least in US. So yeah.
thank you, Dr. Desai. That answered Tejasvi's question. So my question for you is, what kind of software should we use for analysis of the YRBS data, and which is the easiest one which somebody who's just starting out can use?
So I can say which one you should not use. You should not use SAS. You should not use R and all the things, because they are not user friendly at all. You need to know your coding language and all. You have to type a lot of things. It's not going to happen on beginner level. two softwares that are beginner friendly that I know is SPSS and Stata. I find SPSS more user friendly. Once you get to know, you can do more things with SPSS, but it could be just me because I think there are people who prefer Stata over SPSS. So it would be kind of trial and error, but SPSS I think is pretty simple.
Thank you, Dr. Desai.
Yep.
So my next question is like somebody is trying to make a research question, and they want to use the YRBS data set. So how would you say they write their inclusion exclusion criteria so that, they can work on the data set more easily?
Sure. So inclusion criteria would be, I mean, I don't, so you would, hold on, let me think through this. Let me talk about exclusion criteria first because those are kind of more important. So usually you would exclude all the variables with missing values, which would happen a lot if some of the question were missing, like data. Then when you do regression analysis, it won't include those data. It would only include it if all the values were present. So you can mention that you're going to exclude the missing values. For example, the sexual minority, I mentioned the data is only available from 2015. So that would be your exclusionary criteria, that you have excluded data before that year because there is no information, there's no data. Besides that, the other exclusionary criteria for YRBSS is like, because it's 9 to 12th grade, those who are on extremes of age, like those who are like more than 18 or less than 12, technically it's like they should have a fixed age range from 9th to 12th grade. Only if they started early, late, then that there may be kind of discrepancy in that. So sometimes you only have very few people who are less than 12. And if you take those into your analysis, it would mess up your analysis because that value is pretty small. So you can either exclude those like less than 12 or more than 18, or you can combine them like combine 12, 13, and 14 as a one, then 15, 16, and then 17, 18 as a one. Depends on how you do it, but that's the other thing that you may want to exclude if you're doing your analysis. Besides that, there's no other reason to exclude any other variables to my knowledge. So missing values, this age, and what else did I mention? Yeah, those would be the main ones with this data. And everything else will be included, right? So you mentioned how many participants were included. Like if 2019 data has 14,000 participants, they are included. And then excluding the missing values and stuff. And you can go to the manuscripts. They have to define that, so you also get more knowledge about that. If there are any other things besides these two things. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. Another question I have for you is, again, going back to the courses. So what's better? Is a paid research course better, or is it like do it yourself, learning by yourself is better while you're doing a project?
That depends on your personality, your financial status, and your goals. Paid research, I mean, you are paying it, so obviously you're going to be more motivated to be part of it, because if you are paying money and then you're not doing it, then that's one motivation. It's like buying a gym membership. The other thing is that depending on what course you are involved in, like the outcome may be different. Like I said, that you have to first figure out what your level is and what that course will offer, and whether that matches your current financial, comfort. Because I mean, you can even do MPH for 2 years and spend like $50,000 and be kind of pro by the end of it, or you can do a course on Coursera and then kind of build upon it. So, but my personal experience, I've done both. I feel that with paid, you are kind of motivated to do that.
Okay.
With your own, it's like you may just kind of give up in the middle, come back. It depends on yourself.
Yeah, that answers my question very well. Like I know, I mean, when you pay, you are like more motivated to get your money back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since you have like you recently matched into residency, how do you think we can make an LOR, research LOR, more personalized and more effective into getting the residency?
So, I mean, it's no secret that you want to get your letter from someone who's known in field of research. And in order to work with that person, you need to have some sort of research skills, because I've seen many times candidates would just email them that, hey, I'm interested in research, but they have 10 million things to do and they're not going to focus on you, whom they don't even know, to kind of teach you everything from scratch. So if I would recommend that first, gain some essential skills, do some publications, and then reach out and know what kind of research they are doing, and tell them that, hey, I know you're doing this research. I'm interested in this research. I've done XYZ publications. I know how to write manuscript. I know how to do stats and all. Then they're more likely to involve you in that project. Once that happens, eventually we are all kind of become just one group, because everyone kind of gets close once they are part of team, and then you can tell that person that, hey, I'm applying and I was hoping if you can write me letter. It's good to tell them beforehand so they can keep that in mind, and maybe if there are someone who wants to evaluate you, they may give you additional tasks to see how you're doing. It depends on the person. So that would be the ideal way to eventually get more personalized letter.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us like step-by-step kind of a guide on how to approach the mentors.
No problem.
Yeah, Garima.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. I think it was a very wonderful and insightful session. I think all of us learned a lot from you. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Dr. Mansuri, over to you.
Thank you so much, Saral. I have seen Saral grow over the last 1.5 years. So I'm proud to say that he has given a fantastic presentation today. And Saral's hard work is not matched by anyone last year. I think he's worked so hard and matched to his top choice at Drexel. I mean, it's not Drexel anymore, it's Tower Health, but practically Drexel. So congratulations, Saral, once again. And I think I'm so proud of you. Just wanted to say it in front of everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Mansuri. And I would like to again stress out that Dr. Mansuri is excellent mentor. And I personally believe that you may be like the most hardworking person, but if you're not able to channel it in right direction, you're not going to go anywhere. And I think that's where the mentorship becomes very important. So thank you, Dr. Mansuri.
Thank you, Saral, for your kind words.